I always found myself noticing the work dynamics because I actually think that work change is the new climate change. I think hybrid work is only just beginning. The design of work behaviours is going to change. The world of work is connected whether anybody likes it or not, that there's a different value shift in how workers want to work. Everyone else is saying, go back to the office. Then we saw some outliers, and those are in really surprising places. The big lesson from the last 5 years is you can't put the genie back in the bottle. Who thought of that? Is that relevant? I think it really is relevant. The emotions of what people feel and marry that with data. That to me is the new field. The idea that you can command and control people and incentivize them by saying you can keep your job. Physical layout of buildings has got to change. I want to provoke a discussion. And when you actually aggregate all the factors that matter to people, the winners will be people who design work experiences, workplaces, jobs, skills, training, recruitment in a human-centric way that is also AI-enabled.
Welcome to What the F is Happening to the Office. Hi, I'm Bob Fox, and we're here to unpack the transformation occurring in how and where we work. Whether you're in commercial real estate, an architect, designer, workplace strategist, business leader, or if you're just trying to figure out the rapidly changing workplace, you're in good company. And we're here to discuss a broad range of topics that are related to work. We bring a wide range of experts and thought leaders to explore what's working, what's not, and what's next for the office. From workplace culture and office design to well-being and fresh perspectives on the office and how we work, our goal is to help you stay informed. If you're looking for real insights, smart conversations, and stories that matter, be sure to subscribe. Now, I've been looking forward to today's conversation. I'm thrilled to be joined by Julia Hobsbawm, a globally recognized author, speaker, and thought leader on the future of work, workplace culture, and social health. Julia has spent years exploring how we navigate work in an age of rapid technological change, hybrid work, shifting professional norms, and she's the author of several acclaimed books, including The Nowhere Office and a podcast of the same name, where she examines the post-pandemic workplace and how organizations and individuals must adapt. She's recently published The United State of Work, a series of essays by experts on the state of work in our workplaces. And Julia is a sought-after advisor and commentator contributing to major outlets like the Financial Times and Bloomberg. And she's been at the forefront of discussions about modern work dynamics, leadership, and productivity. Julia, welcome. It's great to have you here.
Thank you for having me. As the mother of some children, it's always nice when people are nice about you because there's always an army of young people who are not quite so polite. So I like being bigged up by you.
Okay.
I'm joining you from London. Thank you for having me.
Good. Now, I'm fascinated by your work, but before we dive into your latest report, I'd love to start with a little bit about your own journey. You've become one of the most influential voices on the future of work. Can you give us some background? Where did your interest in work start and how did you get into the concept of work?
Okay, well, thank you. Well, I have a very unorthodox career. I come from an academic background, but I wasn't very successful or confident for a long time in my life and education. And actually, that gave me the luck to be curious and unorthodox about my career path. In other words, I didn't go to university and get a degree. I worked my way up the ladder in the 90s when it was really still possible in a media environment, which is what I began in publishing and then television to do. And I always found myself noticing the work dynamics, the politics, the buildings, that ranged from the very grand. And in fact, I once myself had an office inside Somerset House in London. You don't get much grander than that, the original stamp office of work. So I didn't actually know how interested I was in work, Bob, until the pandemic hit. So the very quick headline, although, my history is pretty well documented if anyone's interested, is that I ran a series of businesses, having had a career in publishing and then a little bit in politics and TV. And I found that I began to get very interested in networks. I began in communications, in PR. Then I got interested in networks. And then I got interested in writing about humans and technology in this world that was by now accelerating. The world is accelerating so fast that I'm old enough to have contemplated an autobiography. And if I had written it, it would have been called From Telex to Twitter, except by the time I had that idea, it was renamed X. And certainly young people don't know what the telex is. I've always been interested in connection, and I've always been interested in how people work. Always been interested in management and leadership. One way or another, that's all come together. My new business is called Workathon. That's the report that you're referring to has been published under those auspices. And we're really trying to be the prow of the ship of a movement of change makers in work right across the spectrum that you articulate, and crucially, right across the world.
Was there a particular moment where you realized the change that was occurring was so dramatic and that you needed to dive deeper into it?
Yeah. I mean, now when I talk to people, I say we are a movement. And in a way, work change is the name I'm giving that movement, because I actually think that work change is the new climate change. It's pervasive. It's going to change everything, every stitch of fabric and policy across in and outside of buildings and in and outside of the design of work behaviors is going to change and need to reform and adapt over the next decade. And there's a lot of us that get it. But only now are we being even remotely, no pun intended, using the word remote, listened to. So my epiphany came in the pandemic. I was sitting pretty much in this space, promoting a book called The Simplicity Principle. It was published in March. So I wasn't going to America, where enormous amounts of book space in bookstores had been bought by my publisher. I was giving interviews by the then new technologies of Zoom and Riverside. They weren't new, but they felt new. And I did that for 6 months. I ran a network, which I began to turn into a WhatsApp community with Zoom. Actually, it was called the Social Capital Network. It was around connecting young, mainly Black and Asian professionals with a sort of mentorship program. So I was doing that. And like everybody else, getting to grips with life as it was changing. Then we came out of maybe the second lockdown. I can't even remember. And I do recall waking up one day thinking, hang on, I know this moment has changed forever, and I know I need to say that it's changed forever. And I literally rang somebody up who ran a think tank and said, I've got this hunch. Do you want to back this hunch? I should also say, by the way, I was a pretend professor for a long time. I was an honorary visiting professor, which is not an academic tenured thing. And for a long time, I was associated with a really prestigious business school. Academics don't rate a fellow visiting professor who hasn't got a degree. And I wasn't really working in the academic system. And so I realized I wanted to do whatever I was going to do outside of it. So I actually contacted the university and said, my 9th year of tenure is ending. Please don't renew. Phoned the head of the think tank. And all of these sort of acts of small bravery were actually possible, weren't they, in 2020? I don't know if I'd have done it again. But I phoned up this particular think tank and I said, look, I've got a hunch. Do you want to back me? I'll write you a paper. I'll keep the IP. I want to call it the NOAA office. I think hybrid work is only just beginning. They said yes. And that paper had a big impact and it became a book and so on and so forth. But it was a hunch backed by not having what Nassim Taleb calls skin in the game. I wasn't working for a large corporation. I didn't need to stay on message. And yet what was fascinating to me and very moving is that Workathon is backed by large companies like JLL. There's a lot of people in this movement, big companies, small companies, disruptors, you name it. So I didn't feel alone for very long. But that was the moment around the fall of 2020.
That's fascinating. Your latest report, the United State of Work, really kind of celebrates 5 years since the pandemic. And I'm curious, what motivated you to begin to put that together? What was there something that you saw that we needed to push out and celebrate?
Well, a new business gets off the ground, you want to state your claim in the ground. And Workathon is a by invitation member organization. And we do thought leadership and events and we're global. So I wanted to publish something that signified that signified our intent. And it felt to me that the anniversary of the pandemic in March 2025 was worth marking and noting. Celebrate is not a word I would use. It was marking it, commemorating it, and doing two things really. One was to invite some key voices to say what either happened then in their working lives and private lives, or what do they think has happened since, and to have almost a lyrical way of looking at that. Essays from individuals saying, one person said, I walked off the street in Manhattan into a hospital and I came out a father and the streets were empty. These were powerful personal stories. But I also wanted to mark the fact that the world has changed comprehensively and is united by the challenges of change. I know we're in quite an unusual era at the moment where there is a certain nationalist retrenchment coming out of the United States. But I really wanted to make the point that the world of work is connected whether anybody likes it or not, and that their concerns are the same because of the disruption that everyone's facing. And in order to do that, we chose 12 countries that had all either locked down or come into some form of lockdown all over the world. Let's see if I can remember them on a Friday afternoon in London. Brazil, Estonia, Italy, India, South Africa, Thailand, France, UAE, Saudi, USA, Mexico, UK. I think that's got up to the number. And so they sort of span, if you like, at least in one country, Americas, Asia Pac, MENA, Africa, Europe. And we said, well, what if we looked at how work has changed in some particular areas? Are there patterns? And we found that there were. When we looked at lots and lots of different data sets, the first thing we noticed was there really isn't the data set that we wanted. So that's a separate thing. We're going to start creating it. But we basically took data relating to a number of factors around three things that everybody associates with this moment. Flexibility, but including issues like benefits, paid time off, so on, sick leave. So we looked at the whole flexibility piece as well as flexible working. We looked at talent mobility. We looked at how that picture had changed because it is a global marketplace. And then we also looked at AI adoption and infrastructure. And we factored in all sorts of data sets and surveys, and we did a country profile of every nation, which we didn't publish, but we wanted to show ourselves that we were doing that rigorous contextual analysis. And then we took a big breath and we ranked them. And we ranked them according to essentially a traffic light symbol of red meant not so great, green meant great, orange meant on the way. But we really wanted to show an intention to embrace and implement at a political level, at a policy level, because it's interesting, in your introduction, you actually missed out policymakers and government. And of course, that's part of the United State of Work, is everybody's sort of in it together, the public, the private. I would like to see a world which values analyzing effectively the Indian army, which I think is the largest, either Indian or Chinese, state army, with the British National Health Service, which is the largest public employer in the world, and maybe Walmart, which still I think has the most employees around the world, and say, well, what in those scaled organizations can we learn? I want to look for new patterns. And what we found was very interesting, which is that the global north, if you like. People don't like all these terms, Bob, but you have to have some terms. The global north, the richer countries, the larger countries, well, certainly the richer countries, they are doing that. Everyone's trying to get into AI, but we looked at a country like Italy. Actually, Italy was in my list. Italy has struggled. Italy did very, very badly, as you know, in the pandemic. They were the first to really be felled. After China, the spread came really from Italy. But their AI adoption and infrastructure is just not as ahead as other nations. Now, UK is supposed to be third in the world on AI adoption, and it is, but its infrastructure is not so good. Broadband is appalling in different parts of Britain. So we almost want to say, well, what does success look like? Well, you have to be able to be connected, for instance. We looked at talent mobility. Italy is offering digital nomad visas. Now, this is also important to the talent piece, that poorer, smaller countries are actually capitalizing on the fact that there's a different value shift in how workers want to work. And so that was interesting, because what we want to do at Workathon is say, look, we know that the economy, technology, and culture of work is changing at the same time. We want to say, how does that mean organizations work at a management level, at a customer experience level, and at a worker employee level? And what are the tools and techniques that they're going to need to use in order to get there? And so that global perspective, even though it was a tiny snapshot, told us a lot. And the final really revealing thing that I thought was interesting, other than the fact that it sort of held together as a piece of research, which we didn't know whether it would, is flexibility. Now, in the UK, you would think that we are pretty far ahead on flexible working. And we sort of are. We have a Flexible Working Act, and we have a new Labour government committed to it. But we have a lot of big business, which, like everyone else, is saying, go back to the office. America, we know, has a very go back to the office sensibility. We then twinned it with policies around sick leave, maternity leave, and so on and so forth. Now, we know that America is very, very low on those rankings. Britain is not so great on some of those benefits. Then we saw some outliers, and those are in really surprising places. The Middle East. Countries that do not have a great record with women, it turns out, are really getting to grips with flexible work and with things that appeal to a rising, younger workforce. And so, for instance, the UAE on the 1st of April introduced, probably one of the most advanced flexible working laws outside of the Nordics. Well, who knew that? Who thought of that? Is that relevant? I think it really is relevant. I think it's really relevant, because the big lesson from the last 5 years is you can't put the genie back in the bottle. That was a very long answer, Bob. I hope that wasn't too long.
No, it's fascinating. And there's so many questions that are going through my head listening to you. But, I know you spend a lot of time thinking about productivity.
Yes.
Wondering if there's any of those patterns or trends that you see that affect productivity or help to improve productivity.
We didn't analyze that. You have to be quite rigorous in the data you are and aren't compiling. And we think we've only just begun to scratch the surface of the data sets that we're going to compile. And by the way, what we really want to do is combine it with not only a new way of looking at data and compiling data, but also very much locating it in an anthropological and ethnography context. We're working with a lot of very distinguished anthropologists, and including Melissa Fisher is at NYU, and Parsons, who's tremendous, and various colleagues from the academic world and the behavior change world, who really want to understand the psychology, the emotions of what people feel, and marry that with data. That, to me, is the new field, the new science of work, if you like. But on the point about productivity, I think we're all understanding that productivity as the old metric in a blue collar context is much harder to apply to hybrid workers who might do some manual work or some out in the field work and some desk work, and that whichever way you measure output and input as metrics, we absolutely know that well-being, happiness, motivation, engagement are all germane to productivity now. At the moment, there really is effectively a political row going on around the idea that you can command and control people and incentivize them by saying you can keep your job or not. And those of us who believe it's a long game, and when you actually aggregate all the factors that matter to people, the winners will be people who design work experiences, workplaces, jobs, skills, training, recruitment in a human-centric way that is also AI enabled.
That's a
That's
good
in the end what success looks like.
I was going to say that's kind of a good segue into one of the things I wanted to ask you about, because I think most of our listeners and subscribers are focused on the actual work environment, the physical space. And I know what you do is much more broad, but the work that we do really has to support that. And I'm wondering if in your research and the findings, if there's anything in particular that you found about the environment, the physical environment, that stood out, that was important for people to acknowledge or consider.
Well, first of all, a lot of the members in Workathon are deeply involved in the design and refurbishing, designing experience, culture, the buildings. I mean, the built environment and the workplace and the workspace is something that interests us very much. And JLL is the foundational partner of ours, but we work with small architecture firms. We have members who are in the flexible working space and so on and so forth. So I think that where we work is as important as how we work and when we work and why. I just think that the shape of it is changing comprehensively. Now, I've written a lot about that in my book, The Nowhere Office, and in my last book, Working Assumptions, which was a collection of essays I wrote for Bloomberg. And I think my research to date has been backed up by effectively the other research that's out there that shows that the central business district is transforming, that when central business districts, again, if you look at, say, the Middle East, they're being built from scratch in a more live to work way. And now you take cities and districts like New York or in London even, and they're being sort of almost retrofitted to have less car, more pedestrian, more live, more work. There's an extraordinary development in London around King's Cross, for example, which is succeeding where currently Canary Wharf, a very famous development, has a lot of catching up to do, because what we definitely know is that pure office-based work environments where the buildings are expected to be static and gone into for long periods of regular time and left, regardless of how you fit out the desks and the soundproofing and the hydroponic plants, that's not completely right anymore. But also, of course, we need to talk about AI and technology in all of this.
What I think is happening is the physical environment and the choices that we have for where and how we work has exploded. And I think the physical now is converging with the digital environment. And so, yes, I mean, I think what you're
Absolutely.
saying about the technology and I think that we're beginning to see very rapid change in the way that we think about and use our work environment.
Yeah. And I think what's fascinating is that in some respects, it's almost as if the debate has caught up with the fact that the physical layout of buildings has got to change. And a lot of emphasis has been made on making workplaces attractive. And we're sort of moved on from the well-being infused candle beanbag stuff pre-pandemic into a much more robust understanding, by the way, of health and mental health. And in Britain, as you know, we have an absolute crisis of inability to work through sickness and mental health problems. But now what we're realizing is that the space itself, it's not enough to try and make the space a magnet. You have to actually iterate in accordance with what's going on for those workers based on that workplace or that demographic or that geography. And that's why in the report, we've actually published a sort of 6-point framework called Workathon frame that we're now developing with our members over the next 5 or 6 years to really drill into them. And we're saying, work and the working economy and work's evolution and all that takes in your main territory is great and really important, and it's one of the 6. We've also deliberately and provocatively, and by the way, you can download this report for free. You just go to workathon.io, and it's been downloaded actually in nearly 50 countries already since publication, which is rather interesting, very gratifying.
We'll put a link in the
Yeah,
description
but
below.
just if people are watching it, they're thinking they can see it. So obviously one of the 6 is what we traditionally think of as a key issue. Another one that we've deliberately worded in possibly a provocative way is we put culture with leadership and management. I don't want culture floating with well-being and health. In fact, I've put health along with rights and with equality, another loaded word in these times. But again, I think I want to provoke a discussion, and our working groups that the membership is developing is going to be global. And it's going to be very interesting culturally to see whether those working groups agree. Another working group is on AI adoption and infrastructure. Now, maybe in 2 years' time or 5 years' time, our language will change. And another one is talent, skills, and learning. Okay? Because that's, again, how do you juxtapose what matters? And the final one, which I think is hugely important, again, I think the language matters, even if it's provocative and people say, I don't agree with that. Great, don't agree with it, change it. Is the final one is geography, demography, and generations. Because we know that there's a generational shift going on. Now, what might happen is that in a year's time, we mix it all up together and they're not siloed and they're not ranked, but they are, I think, the united state of work, which is, I think what we've demonstrated in this report is it does not matter whether you are the United States or you are the United Arab Emirates or you are, you're all facing the same stuff, different degrees. And that, I find that is particularly in these difficult times where there's a lot of hate and a lot of divisiveness and a lot of language of difference. I do quite like, I think it was both Shakespeare in one of his plays, probably several, and my old client and mentor, certainly Maya Angelou, said it, which is we are more alike than we're unalike. And I really believe that. I really do. And that is why Workathon is going to help people think and connect and formulate new things. And we're a platform for services, and we're doing great. But I also would quite like to change the world at the same time. Is that allowed?
I'm curious, if you look out 5 years down the road, what is Workathon? And I know you're also trying to start the World Work Organization.
Yeah. Well, look, I think that first of all, I think what Workathon is beginning to be is a sort of bit of a platform for the economy of services around the future of work. Definitely a community for us is architects, designers, corporate real estate, researchers. Definitely a community for us are people responsible for work experience, workspace, CHROs, legal firms, C-suite. We have chief executives of global retail brands that have joined us. So there are services, and there's a lot of new software coming into the market, particularly AI, that will really substantially change. So I think in 5 years' time, I think we will, I hope, be part of an ecosystem that is already here, but not quite as identified. That's the first thing. The second thing is that the 6 items in the work frame will develop over the next 5 years, and we're developing them as part of a bold experiment I've actually set up called the World Work Organization. And the reason for this is that we are at a moment of absolute transition globally in the same way that we were after 1945. I mean, just again, back to the technology, the culture, the economy. It's not me saying that. It's sort of where we're at. COVID was like a war. We came through the war. We united. We're rebuilding. And we are finding that every aspect of work has been transformed, and yet we're finding there actually isn't an institution or a framework that addresses it comprehensively. Workplace has been over there, behavioral psychology has been in a different place, etc. They've been coming together, but there's no taxonomy of it. And I do want to have a World Work Organization that is global, that is, but first of all, every single country, because the International Labour Organization is an amazing, amazing organization. But it really fundamentally deals with social inequality and rights and hugely important work. But that isn't the whole piece. That isn't the whole piece of the puzzle. And so really the work frame is the working groups of what I hope will become, the first stones in the wall of this building. And my other pitch really for the World Work Organization is one around knowledge and the curation of knowledge. There's been an increase, a quantum, to use the word of the times, increase in the amount of data and opinion being shared around work and the workplace. It's not really been organized comprehensively. And that's what I think we need. And I think we need to also look back to the history of work. So I don't know if you noticed that little word cloud I did of some of the, century old phrases that we need to be referring to. I want what Walmart knows in Africa to be shared with a company in Norway, to be shared with, I want us to really be the United Business School of Work, actually. I've never said that before, Bob. There you are. That's what I think we need to be.
Julia, this is very exciting, and I think you've taken on a very ambitious project, and I'm thrilled to see what you're doing, and I'm definitely going to follow. I want to be respectful of your time. Is there
Thank you.
anything that you'd like to add that we haven't talked about?
Well, I want to hear and learn, and anyone that, if anything I've said has landed, come find us. We're on LinkedIn. Come talk. We're working pretty intensively with small groups of people, and we're working with individuals who are ambassadors for their brands. We are working with brands too, but we do feel that this movement needs the absolute people who want to make those changes, and all ideas welcome. I think we're all in it together. So I'm delighted to have been asked by you. Thank you.
No, and I'm thrilled to share the work that you're doing and help promote the concept because I do think it's something that we really need to dive much deeper into.
Well, let's talk again. And thank you.
Well, Julia,
I
thank you.
better dip off.
This has
Sorry.
been a great conversation. So I appreciate your time. Thanks, and I look forward to
Likewise.
speaking again
Thank
soon.
you.